This is the third section of notes from Unit 3. We've already talked about the fact that Georgians arrived on the Anne, the first 144 colonists, 40 families, arrived first in Charleston, and then they sailed a little further south to Yamacraw Bluff, which is where they chose to land and build their settlement. We'll take a look at these in a little more detail. But what was life like in very, very, very early Georgia? First of all, these people were from London. What really bothered them was the heat and humidity of Georgia's summers. They were afraid of alligators and rattlesnakes. Those were new creatures to them. And they suffered from illnesses from mosquitoes and drinking water. So they were not very healthy. More on that later. The first things they had to do was start clearing land and planting some crops. They started building small homes, not large ones. 400 feet square is not very large at all. They are busy planting their gardens and whatever crops they have for cash crops, milking cows, raising chickens, cooking, cleaning, basically just trying to get through and not starve. Oglethorpe oversees the building of public structures. First, a courthouse, which also serves as a church. He sets up a court to handle criminals and decide disputes, a storehouse, a mill for grinding grain, and a large public oven for baking bread, because for a while people didn't have a way to bake bread in those small houses. Building defenses, making the little town safe, was a priority. Tybee Island, which is where the Savannah River meets the Atlantic, got a fort and a lighthouse. Here's a view of Savannah just a couple of years after the settlers first arrived. You can see that the structure of Savannah is these squares of buildings, and then there's an open place. If you go to Savannah, you still see those open squares. Here's one, there's another in the plans. That's very much part of downtown Savannah. The houses that they were building were not large houses. One of the things that we'll take time in class to do is read from the journal of one of the people who was one of the first colonists. He kept a journal, and we will read that in class. Here's the second page that we'll read. I'll scroll down slowly in case you want to read it on your own later from the video. We'll talk about how the colonists reacted to the Indians, including Tomochichi, what task they had to do, and some other things from the diary of Peter Gordon. I've got another Georgia Stories about what life was like in the very, very early days of the Georgia colony. Now, what were the problems? When Oglethorpe, at some point he left and returned to England, but by 1736 he is back and he brings weapons for defense, because one of the purposes of the Georgia colony was to defend the Carolinas from the Spanish in Florida. There are 3 laws approved by Britain by King George II. The sale and the use of rum or spirits, that's liquor, was illegal in Georgia. A license was required for anybody trading with the Indians, and slavery was made illegal in Georgia, pretty much from the very beginning. White indentured servants were allowed when extra workers were needed. Indentured servitude is when someone agrees to work for you for a certain number of years, usually 7, and they might learn a trade, and you feed and house them, but there's a trade-off, and it's not for a lifetime. Fairly soon, new settlers start to arrive in the colony of Georgia. The first group is a group of Jews who happen by Savannah not long after there is a major epidemic that's killing lots of Georgians. They ask Oglethorpe for permission to stay, and since the colony's doctor has already died and the Jewish doctor on board ship helped save lots of people, Oglethorpe says, certainly, why don't you all stay? They found what is the 3rd oldest Jewish synagogue in the colonies and in the United States. Another group that comes are Salzburgers. These are German-speaking Lutherans or Protestants, they're not Catholic, come to Georgia to escape persecution. They're allowed to become colonists, and the trustees are very pleased with them. They work very hard, and they work hard to try to produce silk. Not everybody is happy, though. They're not happy with those laws. The Rum Act, often ignored or not enforced. There's dissatisfaction about the rule of not allowing women to inherit land. There's resentment over hard work for little benefit because the size of farms is limited. They won't let anybody buy huge areas of land for farming because slavery is also illegal, and if you're going to have huge areas of land, you need lots of workers, which at that point meant slavery. So those two things go together. They begin to pressure the trustees to allow slavery. Let's talk a little bit about the defense of Georgia, one of its purposes in being founded. Oglethorpe is very worried about the Spanish in Florida, so he convinces Parliament to fork over some money. Forts are built at the north and south ends of where people live, in Augusta on the north side, and on St. Simon's Island to the south. The fort and the little town are called Frederica. He has them lay out roads. Parliament approves a regiment of British troops. They form militias, both of those things. And eventually there is a battle, the Battle of Bloody Marsh, July 7th, 1742, on St. Simon's Island. Georgia defeats the Spanish, and after that, the Spanish never threaten any of the other English colonies. In 1743, Oglethorpe leaves England. He doesn't ever come back, but he does live long enough to see Georgia become a state in the independent United States. We'll learn a little bit more and go into detail on the Battle of Bloody Marsh. It's on St. Simon's Island. Spanish landed on the southern end of the fort. That's where the lighthouse is now. We'll be there. And they marched up to where Frederica is, and there was a battle, and they were defeated. That's it for Section 3.